It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza, good morning.
Hello, Irwin.
So, Esperanza, when I look back on how we came across inviting our incredibly special guest this morning, talk about organic, right? I'm going to tell our audience how we did, as a matter of fact, because on Instagram, and we're going to introduce our special guest, Hannah Lasurdo, in just a moment. Hannah has an Instagram page called The Salt Heir. That's SaltHeir, The Salt Heir, not AIR. Okay.
Yes, a great play on words.
A great play on words. And she wrote a post. She's part of the Miller family. That's Esperanza. That's royalty on Eastern Long Island, as far as I'm concerned. And she wrote this beautiful post, so poetic, about her family that's how we ended up reaching out to her.
Yeah, well, truth be told, Irwin, right? I mean, I said, who is this person? Find out.
Exactly. So without further ado, Esperanza, I think we're going to introduce, and I hope I pronounced Hannah's last name correctly, but Hannah Lasurdo, welcome to Our Hamptons podcast.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So glad you guys reached out.
Oh, so
happy you are here.
Now, as we said, and Hannah, you've listened to some of our podcasts, I'm sure, and anyone in our audience who has. Esperanza and I have such a deep respect, for Eastern Long Island, but in particular, the families, like I'm going to dare I say the founding families, Esperanza, but just these families, generational. And Hannah is a Miller, and Hannah was born on Eastern Long Island. So this is not someone that was imported from Queens, New York, like someone else on this podcast.
Nothing against anybody imported from Queens, though. It's all about how you interact with the community, and you guys are doing a beautiful job.
Thank you so much. Flattery will get you everywhere, especially with my fragile male ego. But Hannah, so tell us. I mean, so you are a Miller, and you've, in our little informal dialogue, you would tell us like a couple of stories, and you shared again on Instagram on your page, but tell us what that was like as a young child, growing up a Miller. I'm just going to put it out there just like that.
Sounds like a good Netflix series.
Right.
It does. It really does. It's a good segue. I grew up in the 80s. I don't think I really had a stereotypical experience of a Bonniker childhood, because my mother actually had a lot of shame about it. Back then, it was sort of, oh, you're a Bonniker. Oh, that meant you were uncultured, uneducated, that you were from Springs, you were from the wrong side of the tracks. And I got a lot more of that when I left Spring School and I went to East Hampton, and then it was, it was a stigmatized thing back then. I think now it's become more accepted because we're realizing that this culture is being taken away, and the fishing is being taken away, and we've got Billy Joel songs now, and we've got Peter Mathiasen writing books, and we've got a movie coming out, right? So now it feels a lot more special, but back then it was it was different, but and we weren't really close with a lot of the family. I tried to get a lot of stories, but I'd find out, someone would tell me a story and then someone would say, no, that's not right. And, so I try to have like a nice idea of my history, but it gets fragmented. And so I don't really have a lot of stories of me growing up, but I can tell you, a bit about my lineage.
Yes, please, we would love to hear that. I mean, and we touched on it, and you wrote to us a little bit about it to give you the background. And, Esperanza, the name Stephen Talkhouse came up in some of these dialogues with Hannah. So yeah, we'd love to hear a little more about that lineage. That would be great.
Yeah. So The family stories are that our lineage goes back to the 1600s, the original founding families, although I'm still trying to get a family tree out of my relatives and nobody wants to finish it. They like to tell stories. I think this is a Bonneker thing too. Well, your
Yes.
great aunt so and so, who wasn't really your aunt, married this one, and then that, we're part of the Pearson family from, and it there you hear names and they get repeated, and you're trying to draw these. I'm a very visual person, so I've been asking everyone forever, please just write it down on a piece of paper, and I
They're spinning yarns.
yes, oh no, there's no family tree, but your great great so and so was and I'm still trying to piece those pieces together. But it goes back to the mid 1600s, evidently. I don't really have the names of anyone past Jonathan Allen Miller. He was one of the original keepers of the Montauk Lighthouse, mid 1800s. So from the mid 1800s back to the mid 1600s, I don't have a lot of information.
Right.
I do have Jeanette Rattray's genealogy book,
Right.
and I need to sit down and spend more time with that, trying to pull pieces. I have my grandmother's notes in there. It's just something I haven't gotten around to doing. But um, as far as that traceable history, it goes back to Jonathan Allen Miller and my great uncle Milton Miller, who who died a little while back, but he was one of the main characters in Peter Mathiassen's Men's Lives
Right.
book. He was founded the Dory Rescue Squad and
Right.
the East Hampton Baymen's Association, and was, just very involved in the Bayman culture his whole life, very respected in that sense. And he was my great grandmother's brother.
Right. And there was
Um,
interaction with the Lesters and the
oh,
Bennets. I mean, because these were
of
all,
course.
Right.
going back to that, the men's lives, and that's a book Esperanza and I have touched on, often on our Hamptons podcast. So you had those kind of interactions. They were almost like extended family in a sense, because the community itself was so tight.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We'd go down to commercial dock and they'd all be down there mending nets, and you'd pick up little bits and pieces of stories. But, as kids, we would go down and break mussels and tie them, or take chicken pieces and try to catch crabs off of we'd try to be
Oh my
like
gosh,
them.
really?
It was kind of it was a cool way to grow up,
Oh my
those
gosh.
pieces of it,
I, I, it's Esperanza. We often romanticize this life, right, Esperanza?
Well,
We,
it's easy to do that, but I was just this morning, in fact, reading an article, and 1970s out here, it was the time that was delightful for me, and certainly I was a child, so I couldn't see all of the, sort of the roughness of things, probably for a lot of people. Even though I went to school with a lot of kids who were, descendants of founding families as well, you're a child, you don't really, I don't know, maybe I just was oblivious to it, but um I know in speaking with people nowadays, between the 50s, 60s, 70s, there's a lot of poverty. I mean, this was a place where you could make a living, you'd live off the land and the sea, but it wasn't like you were, in the lap of luxury. And I guess that was sort of okay for people, but also a lot of people had to leave. It's the history keeps it keeps happening. Now they're leaving for other reasons, but it's kind of, it keeps happening. It's not easy to
exactly.
live out here.
Exactly. And I think that's where a lot of those stigmas come from. There's stigmas about poverty, and there was also a lot of addiction and mental health issues and abuse in these families. A lot of the friends that I had very rough upbringings, and it was just kind of a generational thing. Well, so my dad hit me with a belt, so I'm going to hit my kids with a belt. And
right.
I think we're finally getting to a point now where people are more open to going to therapy and working these things out and doing a better job and breaking these generational cycles of really difficult things that made our lives harder.
Mm-hmm.
Esperanza, it harkens me back to, and again, this is something we've spoken of so often. This is so thematically in our wheelhouse. But, you just mentioned the term, how, and you referred to it from an era that's, again, here's an Our Hamptons podcast line. It's not ancient history. Talking about the 50s, 60s, 70s, where people were living off the land, and, you fast forward to what we now see on Eastern Long Island. Look, and we've been over this, the wealth in certain parts was always here. It was here in the 1880s, but people were living off the land. That is a community that is, dare I say, that is disappeared at this point. That is, but it was in your lifetime. It was something Hannah is
Yes.
reflecting back, sort of remembers, you know, firsthand. Right, Hannah? Like
Oh,
just,
absolutely. Absolutely. My
Yeah.
grandparents grew vegetables in their backyard. Everyone went crabbing and clamming and fishing and it was communal. They had their little recipes. There's recipe books out there of
right.
Bonica clam pies and stuff like
Yes.
that. But
Oh, yeah.
no, they would things that my great grandparents grew snap peas and they would pick those, they'd give them to their neighbors. Their neighbors would bring some crabs in, and everyone's making similar meals and living off this beautiful so it is very easy to romanticize it. And
Yes.
Right.
I
Right.
was trying to come to it with a very realistic perspective of, yeah, but it was really hard too.
Hmm.
It's a tough place for people to grow up, not only because there's this sense of loss because we're losing family members who are leaving, we've lost our way of life, we've lost our homes, but also because you're constantly culturally surrounded by people who look down on you. That's where a lot of that dichotomy comes from with there's people coming into my home and telling me that I'm not good enough to be here. So as a Banneker, you go walk around the village and you don't feel like you belong there,
You
but this is
belong. Right.
your town,
Yeah.
right? So there's
Right.
it's loss, it's internal loss and external loss. And
Yeah.
and also the other things that I was talking about. And there's a lot of addiction, a lot of people that are Bonnekers are heavy, heavy drinkers, and it's been that way for forever, and I think it is getting better. I think each generation gets a little bit better, but it's tough, and that's why I wanted to focus on the things that kind of bring people together, and these little beaches that we drive to, they're like our solace. It's we can go down there when things get difficult or when we feel conflicted or when we feel excluded or we feel lost or whatever it is, that it reminds us of why we're still here,
You know,
Correct.
as,
Yeah.
why I
Yeah.
live here,
That's
right?
exactly right.
as
Yeah. So long as I can block out some of the big houses that are sometimes plopped right in the middle of those beautiful scenes.
Exactly.
Yes. I just kind of put blinders on and you focus on certain aspects. And it's true. That is the primary reason
you know,
why many of us remain here.
Esperanza. A great philosopher once used the term that history is circular. Uh, I don't know who this brilliant person was that came up with that term, but I
I'd
got to
like
tell
to
you,
know myself,
I
but
was really
I
just.
just repeat it.
It's an Esperanza Leon line. I mean, she's not taking credit for it, but I always give her props because I just love that term. I even mentioned it to Hannah Esperanza before you signed on. But when I say history is circular, um, the the issues that Hannah is bringing out, um, we've spoken about that as early as I think our second episode, the upstreeters versus the Bonnickers.
Right.
Right, the upstreeters decamping to come up to their camps off on 3 Mile Harbor, to let their homes out to the people from New York. I mean, and all of that, the dichotomy that Hannah speaks of, it resonates so. But Hannah, I wanted to ask you this also because this is something, Esperanza has brought this out. If you read our bio, or an article that was done on our website about in the early days of our Hamptons podcast. And this is something I asked Hannah, when we had our little pre-conversation. You left Esperanza the same way you left. You went away to school and whatnot, but Esperanza always reflected how she was drawn to come back here the same way you were. So Hannah, why don't you elaborate on all of that? You started already with you talking about the little bays, but why don't you continue in that vein?
Yeah, absolutely. I moved away for about 10 years. I really, when I left, had been struggling with addiction issues. I got sober when I was 20 years old, which says a lot. I had been drinking heavily since I was 14.
Right.
And I felt like I just needed to go figure out who I was and find myself and, moved all around the country. So I started in Vermont. I lived in Massachusetts and Rhode Island and Washington State and California. I just kept searching for more, just hungry for knowledge and meeting new people and having new experiences. But everywhere I went, you compare it to where you're from. What are the differences? The seasons and the architecture and there's an aesthetic component to it, but there's also just there's something in your blood, right? And I love California, but there were no seasons and the houses were stucco, not shingle, and the gardens were dry and there were yucca plants. Where's the hydrangea, So after going around for about 10 years, I was just drawn to come back, and I felt like I was bringing my new self back home, right? My new educated, no longer this kind of suffering, addicted Bonneker kid, and came back, and there was dark and light to that too. I fell back into some destructive patterns for a few years before I kind of figured myself out. And I think there's a lot of components that fed into that, but there was just something about home. And the thing that I always did was drive from beach to beach. And I did this forever. I need to go out and kind of just absorb this feeling of this place. So start at Montauk Point and stop at Shadmore, or stop, and I have all these little places where I'd stop, or I'd go run around Big Reed Pond in Montauk, and you just feel like you're home. There's just something about it, and I can't even explain it. But
No,
and I've done. Have you guys ever done? This is a rabbit hole. Astrocartography. Do you guys know anything about astrocartography?
Yes.
Right? It's such a funny little thing,
Yeah.
and I did my astrocartography reading after living all around the country and being like, well, why don't I feel the same way when I live in California as when I live out here? And my reading was very specific about creativity, but also struggling with addiction and all of these things that I feel out here that I when I live in California, I don't feel the same way. There's something,
Hmm.
I don't know, I'm not that woo-woo, but there's funny little pieces that come into, your
sure.
connection to a place. And it's also 300 years. It's in your blood. What are you going to do?
But Hannah, it's so interesting. I hear you talking this way, and what's striking to me is that I wasn't born here. I came here when I was turning 5. Um, it's not in my blood, right? Because I wasn't born here. I'm not a descendant of anything here. But what you described, after being away for many years, I came back. I went down to the beach, and I said, because I wasn't intending on staying here.
Right.
I thought, okay, I haven't been with my family for a while. I'll stay here for a bit, work a little bit, and then, find my way to someplace else. And that was the experience. What you described was going down to the beach and just thinking, this is where I have to be.
This is home. Yeah.
This is
So, and
home.
it's a hard
Yeah,
place to live. So you have to figure out how you're going to do it, right? You're
right.
like, how am I going to afford to live here? This is, and
What am I going to do?
what am I going to do?
What is an art historian going to do?
Where do I fit, right? Because,
Yeah.
and that's something that I've always struggled in. I never really felt like I fit in with a lot of the Bonneker community because my mother was kind of this barrier. She didn't want to be that. She didn't like it. So she dropped the accent and raised us very kind of isolated from the family. So culturally, I didn't really fit in, even though those were my people. But of course, I didn't fit in with the upstreeters and the summer people either. So it's
You have
that's
one foot in one place, one foot in another, and never quite
exactly
fitting. And yes.
exactly. I never fully fit in anywhere, but I felt like this was my home intrinsically, and I had to find a way to make it all make sense,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
now in my 50s, you get to a point where you're like, okay, I've been busting my butt working for other people, making other people's businesses survive. I should take the things that I love and make a little something for myself, right? Dump all that energy and creativity into something that I can really believe in, you
And
know.
I want to really get into that now, Hannah. And hey, Esperanza, by the way, in case you didn't notice just now, this guy from Queens just sat back and acted as a listener, listening to the two of you, because you're really on similar wavelengths. You have, sort of, there are parallels to both of your respective experiences. Our differences obviously not identical, but just in terms of, a life experience of really living here from, in Hannah's case, from the beginning, and in Esperanza's case, as a little girl.
From
So
almost the beginning.
almost
Yeah.
the
I
beginning.
mean, I
So
think had Hannah not lived in Springs, we would have been in school together.
yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, but it was really, I like just, it was, for me, it was really wonderful to be a fly on the wall and just listen to that. And I think that's really going to resonate, really well with our audience. And, Hannah, I normally say this to a guest more towards the end of the show, but you're so eloquent in expressing your life history. I mean, honestly,
Thank you very much.
really, it's
I
really,
think she's taken a few years to really figure it out from what I hear.
yeah, Esperanza,
Deep breath.
you know,
Yeah.
I'm
And it's
thinking you ought
great.
to, I'm thinking you ought to fire me and make Hannah the co-host of
Yeah,
our
I think
podcast.
Irwin,
But just
we may,
Never.
if you ever need to go on
yeah,
vacation,
yeah, 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 yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, watch your step, Esperanza. Anyway, but but Hannah, I do want to really touch on that because, and it really, I've done what you've done, like those little. I go from Girard to Louse Point to the end of Landing Lane to the end of Barnes Hole Road to the end of Albert's Landing. I've done that. And I've often always marveled in a lot of ways. Yeah, you go to the ocean in the summer, boy, sometimes you have to wait for a parking spot, but these little inlets, and I've gone there in the middle of July, on a 93-degree day, and I'm the only one there sometimes. I mean, it really is
Mhm.
remarkable. And yeah, there are some hidden ones, and we won't give all of those away, and that really, Hannah, that really like inspired what you were talking about. We're going to get into the salt air and tell our audience a little bit about, from the point that you just said, I'm tired of working for somebody else. I have all of these thoughts in my head. Here's what I'm going to do, because we want to know.
Sure. Gosh, I could talk about this forever, but
Don't worry, we'll limit you.
yeah, it comes from that experience of going beach to beach and just really feeling like you're at home. And one thing I noticed, especially in more recent years, is that it's a very solitary experience for me. I'll do that alone, sometimes with a best friend while we're talking or whatever, but it's often alone. And I have noticed recently almost every time I go to these places, I'll see someone else sitting in their car doing the exact same thing.
yes.
Whereas for so many years, I kind of felt like this was my thing. I never really talked about it. This is what I do because I have these mental health struggles and I have a lot of anxiety and depression. And these places make me feel better whether I'm struggling with like real, external things or just internal things. And it's made me bring it up and talk to other people about it. And I've realized that a lot of people do this. And it's funny talking to you guys. You're like, we do it too. We all do,
Yeah.
So there's kind of this hidden community of people that do these same things for the same reasons, right? And I just wanted to build something around that. And it ties back into the sweatshirt thing. My mother worked at a place called Springer Sport that
Oh,
was on
Yes.
Newtown
I've,
Lane in the
yes.
80s, right?
Yes.
And she would help design these sweatshirts. They would do these cool little, and she always had these ideas about doing like Napeag and things that were, not just like East Hampton, New York, something that's a little more special and specific. And it's always been in the back of my head, like, why is nobody doing this? I'm kind of tired of seeing the Hamptons, New York sweatshirts, right? Like, what are you saying when you're
Yeah.
wearing a Hamptons
The
sweatshirt?
generalization. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. You're just kind of, oh, well, I went to this place and it means nothing. And I don't know, I don't know what you saw or what you did.
Right.
But there's something so specific about these little specific places, right? So it that all came together. I was like, and I actually worked for a clothing company out here. A friend of mine owns a company and she makes her own clothing. I worked for her for a year and I learned a bit and kind of put all those pieces together and designed these sweatshirts. And I'm having them made and I don't have any pictures, right? So I'm like, I want to get my social media up. What am I going to do? I need pictures of the East End. And I'm looking, I'm like, I don't want to use someone else. I don't want to use stock photography. I'm just going to go take my own pictures, right? So I just started going out and taking photos and I just loved the process because it ties right back into going beach to beach and having this moment and it gave me purpose at the beach. I'd get out of the car at each one and walk down the beach. Now I'm interacting with these places a little bit more and I'm like, I'm using them for social media. Why don't I up the ante a little and create photos to sell? So that just became part of it. It's just about these places. So now it's the pictures of the places. It's the sweatshirts with the places on them. Hopefully next year, if I do well, I'll add some t-shirts and so, some more things and different designs each time. I'm going to do limited runs. Each summer will be a series of beaches and colors and styles, and then they're gone. Then the
And,
next year we're going to do something different.
and Hannah, and what in addition to and the pictures again, this is for all you people who follow us on Instagram. This is the Salt Air, Heir. You can look search for that, but as beautiful as the pictures were, and they were fantastic, and I'm sure it was just from your iPhone or whatever, but you captured it well enough. But it was the prose, and that's what I'm
Yeah.
calling it, the prose of you stopped at this beach, Hannah, and this is the vibe. Now this is my own. This is subjective, Esperanza, right? But this was my interpretation. She stops at these places that to people that live here or have been coming here for a while is very recognizable to her point. Not necessarily the visitors who only know Nick and Tony's and the Palm. This was really for the was what I think what she's saying is it's more inside. And I okay, like if we wore a villa hat, right? That kind of thing. But um the prose she wrote, just seeing this, and it's almost like the picture inspired her to start going back and tracing her own family history. And I remember reading these. I was going to really pull one up and read it, but I don't want to do that, because I want it to be in Hannah's words. But that was my takeaway, Hannah, like seeing those pictures and then reading,
The
really,
juxtaposition. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And it was poetry, how
Hmm.
Thank
beautiful it was
you.
Yeah.
written.
True.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. I've always tried to write a bit. I've done copywriting, but I've always been a little bit of a writer and I do think that that aesthetic inspiration that comes from the photo, it can just take you right back. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the photography. I'm not really trying to be a fine art photographer in the sense that I'm going out and capturing that's something that's like breathtaking and oh my God, how did you get that? Or what is that? Oh wow, that's. It's just sort of these little snapshots that are living in everyone's head. Just that little like, oh, that's when I take two steps out onto that beach. That's what it looks like. And everyone's seen that same imagery. And then you kind of fill in your own memories.
Yeah,
Mm.
you know,
Well said. Yeah.
Esperanza, what it reminds me of a little bit, what Hannah's saying also is a mutual friend of ours and an artist we love, Casey Chalem Anderson, she's a big listener of our show and she always
She does
comments and
beautiful
everything.
work. Yeah.
Yeah, but like I remember Casey said something, like she likes to paint the sea because it's like a reminder of how small we are we're in the scope of the universe. And I almost think like when Hannah pulls up and takes photographs of these scenes, there are so many things, her own personal history, the family legacy, but dare I say, really almost again the special sauce of this place that made someone like her who traveled all over the country trying to, dare I say, find her way or just
Yeah. Or find yourself.
find
Yeah.
herself, Esperanza, who went away from this place and came back and sat on a beach and said, wow, this is home.
It's where
And
I
even
belong. Yeah.
and even for someone like me, and again, I'm obviously not born and bred here, no question about it, but I've always, and this is again, anyone follows our Hamptons podcast, this is how Esperanza and I first met with these kind of conversations, how much this place, if you look at it from that perspective, just pulls you in,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely.
And why? We always are trying to put our finger on why, right?
Right.
I mean,
I think these are the little places that don't change too. There's something about the amount of change that happens,
mm,
especially in a community like this where you feel like things are constantly being taken away. You know, your
mhm.
view across the farms in Wainscott that used to be unobstructed and it went straight to the ocean, right?
Right.
And then these lines of houses all came up. And then
Yeah.
all the mom and pops that we could afford to shop in and in town are gone. And they're all, you know, these big Rodeo Drive
Right.
luxury chains now that I'm not going in there. You know,
Right.
why am I
No.
walking into Chanel? You
Right.
know, where's the barefoot Contessa, right?
Yeah.
But these little beaches are basically, you know, you drive down to Landing Lane or Girard, yeah, there's a few changes, but it's not that much. And luckily there are restrictions for building, thank goodness. And there are a lot of preserved areas like at Napeague. No one's going to build a house in the middle of that area, but
Not yet.
right. I mean, most of it's
Right.
preserved, so
Yeah.
thank
I
goodness,
right.
you know, up to Lazy Point and stuff. But these are those places that don't change, and I think this is what gives us a sense of belonging because you
Right.
can look at them and imagine what they were like hundreds of years ago, and hope that they're going to look very similar hundreds of years from now.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's
Yeah.
another
You
conversation,
know.
but
Yeah. It's like a reassurance,
Yeah.
right? It's sort
reassuring,
of grounding and
exactly,
reassuring.
Yeah.
exactly grounding and reassuring. That's exactly it.
You know, we're going to start wrapping up, but um, wow, this has given me such food for thought, and it just again, Esperanza, it's needless to say, um, I'll state the very obvious. Boy, is this our sweet spot or what? Because this is the kind of story we love, the theme of the story, but really a firsthand, authentic account of it. And I think when we talk in terms of what made you come back here, what made Esperanza want to come back here, the draw of this place, through it all, yes, through the obstructions of view sheds with 40-foot tall arborvitaes and monstrosities, enormous sized houses and everything else, there's still that intangible that's still there. And I think, Hannah, to your point, it's really when you go down the little landing lanes and these little secret spots that, Esperanza, it's like, your faith gets restored a little bit.
Yeah.
It's not all gone. It's
Exactly.
not all gone.
It's not all gone. There are a lot of places that are the same. And I
Yeah.
think they tie us together. They tie together the Bonnickers and the out of towners that respect the area. I think I would consider people from out of the area that show that respect, like you do, just as local as the Bonnickers are, because that's what it's about. I think it's about your connection to the community and doing the right thing.
Connection to the community and to the land. I mean, I think that was something that was very significantly a part of the culture out
Yes.
here and to an extent still is. I mean, unfortunately, and I know we're wrapping up, but I was thinking what we were saying earlier about how people lived from the land, and today it seems like people are living from the land but in a different way, which is rather than crops of potatoes or harvests of fish or crabs, it's um it's the landscaping of big houses. So the land is the yield of the land is a little different. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot different, I
E-
should say. And so we're still living from the land. It's just
Esperanza,
more extractive.
Esperanza, it went from raising potatoes to outdoor kitchens.
Yeah, yeah,
True.
exactly.
I mean, luckily we've still got a few working farms out here, and
Yeah.
there's
Yes,
some farm stands you can go to without exorbitantly. I mean, it's
Right.
expensive, but you have to consider I'm supporting a
I support.
family.
Yes,
Yes.
that
I'll pay more for
exactly.
those potatoes
Agreed.
because I want to
Yes,
support that family and I want that farm to be there. I don't want it to be houses. So
correct.
hopefully we have that ability to do that too. And I'm 100% about going around and buying from farm stands in the summer and supporting these parts of the community that we need
We are
to
right.
Yes,
preserve our
yes.
history.
That should continue to exist, and that also reassure us and ground us.
Yes, we are. We are right. We are right there with you. So,
Awesome.
our Hamptons podcast audience, visit the Salt Air, SaltHeir on Instagram. Google her. You'll find out more about Hannah. Um, Look at those images and really read that prose. It is poetry. Hannah Lasurdo, thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you
us on.
guys so much. This has been wonderful.
It has been great and
Many thanks, Hannah. So good to have you.
fantastic. She's that's was really I have a smile on my face from this podcast, Esperanza. As
Thank you
always, as always, a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.